Hey, this is Lee Balcom, and thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. It's interesting because lots of people have struggles in their marriage, but not everybody works on that. Some people just give up and walk away. And the reason you're here is because you're choosing to not give up. But that's exactly what we want to talk about today. Because one of the questions I have frequently from people is, so what's the deal? You think every marriage should be saved? And then there are people who say, do you think really every marriage can be saved? And then there are those who just ask me the question, should I even try to save my marriage? All great questions. And sometimes people think that I am the guy who thinks that no matter what, your marriage should be saved. And no matter what's happened, your marriage can be saved. And no matter how you're feeling, you should be the one saving it. That's an assumption that people make based on the fact that over the years I've written a number of books about how to save your marriage. I've created lots of videos and I've online courses and all kinds of other information on how to save your marriage. So let me tell you, I think where the seed of all of this started. It started in my childhood, not in my immediate family. My parents are still, to this day, I'm very fortunate to still have them around, and they are happily married. And I've learned a lot about what it means to be married by watching them. Not only that, but my grandparents on both sides stayed married until one spouse died. And so they survived their entire marriage, right? And they not only that, but had good, happy, satisfying marriages where they were able to devote time to each other and to their family. Great models for that. Myself, I have been married now my entire adult life. My wife and I got married shortly after college, and we've been together since then. Both of my siblings are also married and in good relationships. And so it's not my immediate family where the seeds of this started. But when I was a young child, I watched as my uncle and my aunts went through marital struggles. In fact, multiple marital struggles. And I saw what happened to the family. I remember being at my grandmother's house and pulling out some photos where my former aunt had been cut out. Now, I don't know who did the cutting. I don't know if it was my uncle who was upset about it or my grandmother who didn't know what else to do, but somebody had cut her out of the family photos. And here's the thing. She was a part of the family when those photos were taken. And I thought, wow, what an interesting psychology to try to remove somebody from the history of the family. And it struck me about how something was wrong with this approach. Now, my uncle went through a number of other marriages along the way. He finally did find success in marriage at the final person who they stayed married until he died. And so he did finally find some place of success there, but along the way, there was a lot of damage done. Three cousins in that family are now, in my mind, very much divided in the family. I have minimal contact with one. I have zero contact with two. I tracked one down. I can't find the other. I've lost track with cousins of mine. That affected me directly because they suddenly were no longer in my life. On my other side of the family, my aunt also went through a pretty hard divorce, and my cousins were affected by that. And not only that, but my relationship with them was affected by that. Another aunt also had a number of marriages that were unsuccessful. And what I watched was the effect of that, the pain it caused for the people going through the divorce. So my aunts, my uncle, and my previous uncles and aunts were all affected by this. And so what I kind of realized was how many generations are affected. I saw my grandparents who were just didn't know what to do to be supportive on both sides of their kids at the same time of watching the pain that was being created in their families, and they didn't know what to do about that. That's a generation. I watched my aunts and uncle who were greatly affected and had very tough times coming out of those divorces. So another generation. Then I watched my cousins who were deeply affected, deeply wounded by those events and other events. And then I watch how people sometimes, and so there's a third generation, and I've watched how that also has affected even a generation below that. And so here it is, four generations affected by one decision that a couple made that I think maybe they underestimated how impactful that was. That's why I do what I do, because I know the effect of what happens when families go through divorce, what happens when the couple goes through divorce, what happens when kids go through that. I see the effect. I have seen it firsthand. I watched the pain. So I think that almost in some ways created the trajectory of my life, where I went to college realizing that I would do some type of therapy. It wasn't this that I thought I would be doing. But then when I went to grad school and started training, I got into training around marriage and family therapy, along with individual models of therapy, because I really wanted to help people navigate these tough times. Which brings me to those questions. Do I think every marriage can be saved? I absolutely do not. In fact, there are some marriages that do not need effort put into them when there is abuse, when there is the kind of pain that comes out of abusive situations. I don't think abusive situations should be saved. I believe that the person who is suffering that has a right to find some peace from that. So I absolutely do not believe that when abuse is involved, that somebody should work to save the marriage. Okay, so I absolutely do not believe every marriage can be saved. Not only that, but I know many times marriages are so far gone that the likelihood of survival is pretty low. So those marriages are not going, practically speaking, are not going to be saved. So no, not every marriage can be saved. And so let's just kind of get that out there, that it's not possible to have that. And so, the question is the level of damage and what could happen with some proper guidance and knowing exactly where you're trying to get to. Because honestly, most people don't know where they're trying to get to when they get married. They start out at a deficit of understanding, and then they're trying to figure out, as I talk about, it's on-the-job training in a job that matters a lot, where the risks and the pain coming out of that can be so high, and yet there's this dearth of information that many people tell me that my system, my Save the Marriage system, should be mandatory reading for people before they get married. Unfortunately, people don't start looking for solutions until they know they're in trouble. So that's where it is. So, and the question is, how much trouble? So sometimes too much trouble has already happened in the marriage. Too much pain, too much difficulty, too much resentment, too much has been toxic in the relationship. So not every marriage can be saved. Now, do I believe that everybody should try? Here is my bottom line answer. Two pieces to it. First, there is only one way to really determine if a marriage can be saved, and that's by trying to save it. There is no other way, because I've seen some marriages, people often write me and say, this is what's going on in my marriage. Is there any way that it can be saved? And my answer is, I've seen it happen. Will it happen to you? I can't tell you, but I can tell you I've seen marriages come back from what you're describing. And the only way to figure out if yours falls into that category is to do the work. And I know that that's scary, because we all want to know where something's headed. We want to have kind of the tell me where this is headed and I'll do it. But it's the unknown. You don't know, because in marriage, the other person can always say, I am not moving towards this. And no matter what you do, you can't get beyond that. But you can't know that until you put in the effort. So one thing is, you can't figure it out until you've tried. You don't know whether it's recoverable until you've tried, and tried with decent information and tried with real effort. Those are important. The second thing is I feel like at a minimum, what I try to provide for somebody is the capacity of saying, you know what, I did what I could. Regret is a painful thing in life. I spent years talking with people in therapy about the regrets of their life. I know the toll it takes on your soul and on your emotional life to live in regret for things that you wish you had done. And this is one of them. I've talked to countless people who will come to me and say, I wish I had tried harder, or I wish I'd tried at all, but I wish I'd tried. I wish I'd tried harder. I just didn't realize what was at stake. Because when you're in pain, sometimes the thing you want most is to get out of pain, and you don't think of the consequences of getting out of pain. And so part of what we work on is figuring out how do you move forward when you're in pain so that at a bare minimum, you can say, I did what I could. Successful or not, I did what I could, right? So I did what I could sometimes means I did what I could and I turned it around. Sometimes it is I did what I could and unfortunately it could not be saved. So bottom line, you don't know unless you try. Number two is you want to be able to live with the outcome of that by not living in regret of what you should or could have done differently. That's a very important part of what I think we try to do. Now, there is this question of what does the effort have to look like? Do I have to keep this up forever? No. People often say, should I keep trying? And that is a question I cannot answer because you've got to decide when enough is enough or when you want to keep moving forward. And that has to be an individual decision. What I can tell you is that when people restore their relationship, many times they end up with a stronger relationship than they ever had before because now they've gone through the fire, right? They've gone through the tough times. They've worked to strengthen it. It's like tempering steel, and then they have the edge to it that keeps them through. Many times people discover that they're leaving a legacy for their kids. Because when people come out of broken families, they try to figure out how to do it differently themselves. And that has its ramifications, and sometimes without them seeing that there are other possibilities. So many people tell me that part of their desire to save their marriage is to break a legacy of divorce. And so part of the task is, are we at least demonstrating that this is something serious and we take it seriously? And we do our best to preserve it because that is the task of being in a difficult situation is figuring out how do we get through this the best, which leads me to another piece. When kids are involved, which is very often in a marriage, it's not as if you can go your separate ways and never interact with each other. That's the fallacy. That's the belief that I can finally go, I'm done with my spouse, off I go into the rest of my world. That is not the reality of what happens. You are bound together for the rest of your life for the sake of the kids. So that has a couple of implications. One is you are bound together. And so sometimes people think that a divorce would be away from each other, away from each other, and discover that they almost have to interact more often around the kids going forward after a divorce than they did before, because now you have to coordinate things and you have to make sure everything's taken care of and everything's covered and all of those pieces that are important for the welfare of the kids, which is a primary responsibility in that when you choose to be a parent to take that on, right? So that is a piece of the pie. The other is that if you don't solve the issues of your relationship, you will drag it into your co-parenting relationship. You will, not you might, not you could. You will drag those same dynamics in. Will it be different? Sure. Could it be worse? Yes. Sometimes people tell me that they're tired of picking up the responsibilities of the other spouse and things like that, and I'm like, well, what happens when your spouse is got the kids by themselves, are you going to be able to just let that go? And many times they can't, and they don't realize that until afterwards, that somewhere along the way, maybe they could have transformed things, maybe gotten to a different place in their relationship. And so part of the task is to make sure that you can co-parent together in a healthy way. And if you work through your marriage and work through the issues together and arrive at the end and say, this marriage itself cannot be saved, but we've solved our issues and therefore can co-parent together, that's a pretty good place to be if you can't be in a happy marriage. At least to be able to co-parent together, to cooperate together, to make sure that you're healthy in the ways that you are as parents together, because you're not getting rid of each other, not without even more damage done to the kids. And I say even more damage, because think about the holidays that come up and the other nodal events of life, the moments in life when you either have to completely avoid each other or figure out how to deal with each other. So at a bare minimum, when people work through with their marital issues and try to get through those, at the tail end of it, at least they've resolved the issues that could come back to bite them as co-parents. So, can you save every marriage? No. Should you try? No, you could decide that there is A, abuse involved, or B, you just aren't going to do it. But is it worth it? Barring abuse, I'm going to put my money on that. It's what I've done my whole career. I've been trying to help people to do that every day for, we're 3 decades now. Trying to help people find their way through the maze of relationships. I haven't found too many things in a long time that surprise me very much when people say, you've never seen this relationship. And I'm like, actually, I have. I've walked people through that, because there are some underlying dynamics that are pretty universal to marriages that get into trouble. And there are universal dynamics of how to get out of that. So you've got to ask the question for yourself, why are you here? And how committed are you to working on the relationship? Because if you're not committed, be clear about that and why you're not. If you're just tired, you deal with that. If you're done, acknowledge that and try to find a peaceful way through. But if you recognize that you don't want to live in regret, if you recognize that you're not positive whether your relationship can be saved, if you recognize that you need to at least deal with those underlying dynamics so that you can co-parent together, if you want to be able to move through this and learn the lessons to get you to a better relationship, that is telling me that you're ready to work on your relationship. You're ready to try to save your marriage. And if you need help with that, that's what I've been doing now for over 3 decades. Come visit me at SaveTheMarriage.com. That's SaveTheMarriage.com. This is Lee Baucom wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage.